del sector privado y la mirada externa, cómo nos ven desde el mundo. Esos son los 4 talleres para que ustedes seleccionen el que prefieran y todo lo que quisieron decir durante la mañana y gente como yo no les permitió, lo van a poder decir ahí en los talleres. So let us start. I should start by bringing to memory that famous phrase by Mark Twain, that everybody talks about the weather, but nobody does anything about it. No? You might remember. Well, everybody's talking about nearshoring in Mexico right now. There's plenty of meetings and seminars and so on and so forth. But basically what we found through the Aspen Institute is nobody's doing anything about it. Neither the government or the private sector have come up with a national strategy on this matter. So this is the thrust of this exercise today. And I'd like to start by exploring with you guys, how do you see it in geopolitical terms right now? I mean, and actually today is a very interesting day to have this conversation because yesterday in San Francisco, the presidents of China and the United States had apparently a very good conversation. I don't know whether that's signing peace or not, but we will see. I mean, it's promising at least that they said we are going to move from conflict to competition, or avoid competition and avoid conflict and think on our relationship in terms of competition. So, Everett, what do you think are the main elements that we should have as part of a strategy to make sure that North America continues to be the most dynamic economic region of the world? And obviously nearshoring is at the heart of it.
Yeah, absolutely, and just want to thank the Aspen Institute and the university for allowing me to be here with this distinguished group. It's really, I learned a lot this morning, and hopefully we'll be able to contribute to that conversation today. I think it's really important to put the whole idea of nearshoring in context because it's not something, it's an ongoing process. It's not something you can just point and go, okay, we're done, we nearshored, it's over. And when I think back on the history of the U.S.-Canada-Mexico relationship, it has evolved and changed over time and adapted to all the external dynamics surrounding it. And the NAFTA was a reflection of what was going on at the time. It was a neoliberal idea. It was a lot about integration, just-in-time supply chains, and it worked really, really well in many ways. Yes. Wasn't perfect, but it worked really well. Now we've got really a seismic shift in the global world order that is unprecedented probably in most of our lifetime, and we're not sure exactly how it's going to resolve itself. So we have to deal with this ambiguity about where the world's going. We know a number of things. We know that the geopolitical tension between China and the United States is going to exist. We know that companies are very concerned about security and resilient supply chains. We know that labor environment issues are going to continue to be at the top of the list of important issues for companies. And in fact, there was a recent study that came out that showed, this was by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, that showed that geopolitical risk was one of the most cited risk factors by companies when they went up to the S&P when they're doing their SEC filings. So I think what this tells us is that we have an opportunity here, but we're at the beginning of the opportunity. With the recent agreement between the United States, Mexico, and Canada, it lays a foundation for us to build on, but it is not enough. So some of the areas that I think can be complementary to that have been addressed today. We talked about energy policy, we talked about workforce. One dynamic that's definitely happening is that the interdependence of the world is not going away, but the technology challenges based around national security are. So when you look at nearshoring and you look at the topics that people are thinking about, like critical minerals, AI, semiconductors, they're all very high-tech, high-value-added products. So that's what we need to think about, is how do we move up the value chain as a region to provide incentives for business to invest in this region and take advantage of that. Workforce, absolutely. You've got to have the service infrastructure to be able to do it. One thing that wasn't mentioned, we talked a little about physical security, but I would also mention cybersecurity, data, the ability to process data. And these tech industries are very, very heavily energy dependent, so you've got to have secure energy resources. So I appreciate what Arjun said earlier about identifying those areas where you could really have an impact. I would look at the high-tech sectors and start with there with maybe some of the incubators that he had talked about as well.
Luis, in your perspective, Luis, what is prompting companies or industries to move around? What are the main elements? What are the propellers, say, of having a company that is already based in Shanghai to go to Tijuana? What are the elements that are behind it? Maybe we have to understand that in order to make sure that we can have a strategy on this issue, right?
Yeah, well, thank you, Enrique, for the invitation. Glad to be with you here. Thanks to the Aspen Institute, to the la Universidad de la Libertad. I'm very happy to be sharing this panel with Everett Eisenstadt. I mean, Everett, North America is in debt with Everett, because he's one of the architects of the North American integration, and we really appreciate what you did in the U.S. government on different roles that you played, Everett, and Mexico is greatly in debt with you. I think we have to distinguish between decoupling and diversification. I mean, this idea that there will be a decoupling from China, from Asia, is absolutely false. It will not happen. I mean, I also subscribe to Thucydides's hypothesis that China and the U.S. will have a war. And I think that's why the meeting in San Francisco yesterday and today is important.
It is, yeah.
I mean, because we need to engage China, and I think Mexico, the U.S., and Canada and others have to engage China by relaunching the multilateral system, including WTO. It's politically incorrect to say these things in Washington, but it's important we say them. Because, I mean, decoupling from China completely, one, is not realistic. It will not happen. It's counterproductive. But that doesn't mean that there will not be a significant diversification away from China. Firms take a portfolio decision. I mean, it's as if you invest in shares in Wall Street, I mean, you will have a diversified portfolio, no? Bonds, and then you have some shares of sectors that are high-tech, other sectors that are more raw materials, other sectors, other firms that are more in the consumer goods segment, etc. When you have an imprint of manufacturing around the world, you will try to strike a balance in terms of diversifying your sources of risk. And in the last 30 years, the large manufacturing companies have invested maybe 70% of their capex in China. And that's too high. Too high not only in terms of economics, but also it's too high in terms of geopolitics. And it's too high in terms of the deep transformation of the Chinese economy. I mean, Enrique and I also we participated in what I will call the 3 previous Mexico moments. Some others here in the Armando and Pancho and others as well. The first one was, of course, the NAFTA negotiation. As Everett said, was momentous, very important. Then we had Mexico becoming a more democratic country with the election of President Fox in the year 2000. And then we had the structural reforms in 2013, 2014, which meant Mexico is maybe willing to take on something that is difficult, like energy. No? This fourth moment, the nearshoring, is larger and is more important. And it is larger because it comes from overseas, is structural, and has a tremendous potential to be a catalyst for transforming the Mexican economy and North American economy if we do things right. And the question is whether we are willing to do things right. And you were saying, are we doing something? Well, the president went to San Francisco. No? Maybe it's a little late. I mean, he should have gone to G20 in Osaka in 2019. But I mean, going to San Francisco in the 5th or the 6th year of his government appears to be a step in the right direction.
Well, maybe because the most difficult year for a Mexican president is the 7th, normally, no? So, It's about time to start sowing the grass here.
Covering all bases, yeah.
Covering all bases, yeah. As we speak now, the perfect marriage has unfolded. Mexico is the single largest trading partner of the United States, and the United States is the largest trading partner of Mexico. So in a way, the most cherished scenario already happened. But it's funny that even though we have this huge bulk of trade between our two countries, there's no common strategy, almost on nothing. I mean, we have been, the three of us, North American enthusiasts, right? There's obviously no consciousness of being North American, no? Maybe the Canadians, because they are just further north, and that's about it. But how can we organize at least a debate on whether and what issues should be of interest for the three of us working together? And maybe China is a good helper in this, but I leave it to you, Everett.
Well, I think you're certainly right. The North American identity is not
there.
Not defined. And even you talk to the Canadians, and they'll make it very clear they're from Canada. They're not from the United States, and that's appropriate. And but at the same time, we're all very much dependent upon one another, and our futures and well-being matter, because if one goes up, the other goes. And we cannot take this stability we have for granted. I mean, there is a lot of volatility in the world right now. There's a lot of sovereign debt out there. There's a lot of things. We just saw, horrific conflict erupt in the Middle East. It wasn't expected. So I think that and I think Luis will agree with this, one of the very most important things we have are all these little institutions and conversations that don't matter or don't appear to matter, whether it be between the Department of Labor and your Department of Labor or the environment, but building those relationships among high-level government officials and the private sector, so when you have a crisis, you know who to talk to, and you have a basic understanding of each other and your needs. Because if we don't do that, then the relationship will atrophy. And we can't allow it to atrophy. So even though, and I'm saying this just as my opinion, the political window right now for a massive nearshoring initiative among the three countries isn't there, but it could come, and it could come in a year, and it could come in 2 years, it could come in 3 years. But we have to lay the groundwork today to be ready. And that means this kind of dialogue and the dialogues among like-minded partners in our respective countries. So the university work, the academic work, it's all very, very important. And there's a lot of elements of the USMCA that are innovative that provide those forums. There's going to be a review of the USMCA in 2026, and some of those forums have not been very robustly utilized, such as the environment. Some have been used a lot, such as the labor rapid response mechanism. But there's going to be a perspective about, well, is this working or should we do something different? So I think what I would suggest is that each of us, and I try to do this, take responsibility for helping to drive that dialogue amongst our colleagues and create that continued conversation, because without it, we won't get to where we need to be when the time is right.
We normally respond, not only in Mexico, the US, but societies in general respond more to threats in general than incentives. Fear is a big driver of change in general in life. And I'm just going to knock on wood here, but maybe if this war in the Middle East spills over, could actually create havoc in many, many parts of the world, including ours, especially the U.S. as a target, right? We lived through this in 2001, 9/11. But I was astonished, for instance, to see that in spite of the real effective threat that terrorism represents for the United States, we did not have a security perimeter, not even the thought of it in North America. It's kind of impressive. I don't know whether that mindset is changing or not. You will be able to tell us, Everett, from the Washington standpoint. But I think that there's lots of issues, including now migration, the traditional drug trafficking, and the environment that should be of common concern. and nothing of that is happening. What do you suggest, Luis, to spark this kind of
Well,
identity, as Everett called it?
I mean, if you went to the White House and you saw the in tray in the Oval Office on the president's desk, you will see, a bunch of documents like this high, no? Mexico is just one of them. So if we want to, and so is Canada. If we want something important, Mexico and Canada have to make the proposals. They will not come from the US. And I think that we always make the mistake of negotiating with ourselves and say, well, we cannot propose this because it's too ambitious. Well, I will have the opposite approach. Let's be highly ambitious and propose something that the US will say no to. The US, if you ask people in 1990, will the US ever sign a free trade agreement with Mexico? The answer would have been no. It's politically impossible. Well, 30 years later, we're still having the USMCA.
What would be the ambitious sort of proposal?
Well, listening to the previous panel. We have two things now that have political consensus in Washington, which is very rare. No, there is no issues in Washington where you have consensus, but there are two where consensus exists. One is China, it's bipartisan, and the other one is migration. We have never seen the migration flows that we're seeing today. So if I was President López Obrador in San Francisco, I would tell President Biden, Mr. President, I just met with Xi Jinping, and I just came from Tijuana, and we saw all this Mexico being used as a platform to enter the US market. We need to do something ambitious. And let me give you some ideas. Idea number one, let's make NatBank a true binational bank, invite Canada also as a shareholder,
Trinational, I was going to say.
and let NatBank fund all the border crossing infrastructure on both sides of the border. On transportation, because NatBank can do only now environmental and water things, they can do the transportation, and give NatBank a charter so that they can do also a border infrastructure in Mexico's southern border, because we need a lot of infrastructure to improve crossing, legal crossing, and make illegal crossing a bit more difficult. That's idea number one. It's a very important one, because if for those of you that I don't see people wearing the people say there is no NAFTA convergence. There is no single Mexican wearing earphones. Either they are doing something else or they're bilingual.
No, probably it's the success of Harmon Hall.
Well, but I think it's quite interesting that you can have now meetings like this in English or in the US. You can also have a lot of meetings in Spanish now that it was impossible 30 years ago. So that's idea number one. Idea number two is, listen, if you truly want to solve migration, we need to develop Mexico South and Central America. And to develop Mexico South and Central America, what you have to do is to tap into the east coast of the US. Mexico has a 15.5% of the US market, but from Texas to California, we have 23%. In the Midwest, we have 18%. And the East Coast, from Florida to Virginia, 9%, and from Maryland to Maine, 5%. So where is growth going to come in the future? In the East Coast. How do you go to the East Coast? Through the Gulf of Mexico. So we need to open a new border between Coatzacoalcos and Mobile, Alabama, make the Maya train a cargo train with some passenger runs every now and then, no? From Progreso to St. Petersburg, Florida, so that you can put Chiapas, Oaxaca, Guerrero at 72 hours of New York City. Then you'll begin talking. Then you need to ask President Biden, listen, we want an exception to the Jones Act for the Gulf of Mexico. He will go ballistic. I cannot do that because the Teamsters will oppose it. Mr. President, you want to solve the migration problem? That's the way to do it, because we need a Mare Nostrum in the Gulf of Mexico, and for that we need cabotage across all ports so that we have the best routes in the Gulf of Mexico. And we're not asking you to remove the Jones Act for the world, only the Gulf of Mexico, and maybe the Great Lakes in
for national security reasons, whatever, yeah.
Then tell him, but I want something more, Mr. President. I want to propose a modification of the rules of origin for textiles and apparel. For Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, Salvador, the Dominican Republic, Nicaragua, Haiti already has it through the Haiti initiative, in such a way that we can give the people working in Chiapas and in Oaxaca in apparel making the best fabrics, the best threads, the best implements that go so that they can excel. I mean, we have tremendously good people producing apparel in Chiapas.
With design, you need other things, yeah.
With the design and everything, but I mean, they don't have the access to the materials to be competitive. So if you want, and why do you need all these countries at the same time? Because the only way to have nearshoring in light manufacturing, not only nearshoring in high tech, that is mostly robotics, is in textiles and apparel and the shoe industry. That's where jobs will happen. I mean, it was mentioned in the previous panel. I mean, you are not going to have Tesla going to the Isthmus of Tehuantepec. But I mean, you can produce a lot of things in the Isthmus of Tehuantepec if we had a flexible rule of origin on textiles and apparel. Of course, North Carolina and South Carolina will oppose it, and a lot of people in Mexico will oppose it as well. But I mean, if you have somebody like López Obrador that really wants to develop Mexico South, this is an opportunity to truly transform. And I have other ideas like that. I'm not saying that we should take 2026, as Everett was saying, to reopen the agreement, because that will fail. But I mean, it's the other way around. You want to solve migration, there is a consensus, and you want to have a true nearshoring that is not limited only to high tech. Well, why don't we have a big initiative to do light manufacturing in Mexico South and medical tourism? And for medical tourism, Mr. President, we need certifications, FDA, certifications of Mexico's hospitals, of medical procedures, et cetera, et cetera. And we need universities to open up in Acapulco. Now Acapulco is destroyed. Well, why don't we have a large hospital center in Acapulco with a nursing school and a medical school and a good hospital, and then invite NYU to come to Mexico and do that in Acapulco? Are you serious about migration? I think that's the way to say it in the US, and of course the answer you will get is no. The alternative is to do nothing, and I think that the probability of that they will accept is low, but if we stay quiet, is zero.
Let's pretend just for a second that Everett is President Biden. Okay?
I wouldn't be sitting here, but yeah, we can.
How would you, Mr. President, would react to what the President of Mexico just said?
I think he'll say no. I think he'll say no. First off, there's no way you're going to get 72 hours to New York. We can't do that from Washington, D.C., so I think that is a highly ambitious goal. But no, I love your vision, and I think it really validates the point that good ideas matter, and you got to get good ideas on the table. A lot of what you said does seem impossible, but it is not impossible. And I think, as you mentioned, the NAFTA was, you look back to the 80s, it would never have happened, never. But some bold leaders put it on the table, and the validity of it made sense, and it came to fruition over time. So I've always believed that when you got a big, complicated problem like this, you need a good idea and the right political opportunity, and then a team to execute. So the good idea is where you have to start. Those are some good ideas. I would put another piece on the table if we were actually negotiating this. I'd say, okay, let's think about it, but here's something that we should also think about. How do we companies are so interested in mitigating risk, and one of the risk factors they have now is labor and environment exposure, which is not just a trade risk, it's a reputational risk. And it's becoming more of a legal risk in the United States because there's laws in place that haven't been in place for a long time. And companies work really hard to, have their brands. They don't want to be in the wrong side of things. And then the climate objectives, if they're ever going to be met, the ambition has to go higher. And that means real steps have to be taken. So what I would suspect would be said in reaction to what you put on the table is, okay, well, let's talk about how do we ensure that those supply chains are going to be the highest labor and environment standards so that we can know that what we're building is going to be sustainable and be the next iteration of trade and not just going back a new version of the past, because that's what we need. We need a real new vision of where to go in nearshoring. And where the political environment is now, and I think that labor and environment have to be part of that conversation.
Absolutely, Mr. President, and that's why just moving production from China to North America will make a huge contribution to that process. Because in China, 60% of the energy they use is coal, in spite of the fact that they are growing very fast in renewables. And in North America, we have tremendous potential. By the way, the Isthmus of Tehuantepec has the best wind in the world. But the current government, of course, is unwilling to develop that asset. But maybe other governments, in the context of an agreement such as this, will be willing to do something ambitious. And, we want the best working conditions for Mexican workers working in Mexico South. And giving them the best fabrics is part of improving their working standards. So yes, absolutely. But just moving from China to North America will make a huge contribution to that process.
One area that has not been explored in the previous panels and neither in this one, but I'm curious to know your thoughts about it, and has to do with nearshoring in services. Mm-hmm. We have been talking about mostly merchandise industry, transportation, that kind of thing. But how about nearshoring in services? What Mexico's shot should be in order to get some of the services providers to come to Mexico?
Yeah, I thought the idea about a visa for kind of a reverse visa where you could have highly skilled or necessary skilled individuals come down, maybe they'd be part of a training program, was pretty innovative. When you look at, and I agree to some extent that textiles are definitely very, very heavy in job creation, but you're competing with a lot of different areas for those. And I think where the U.S. is looking for new partners is in some of the more dual technology areas. So I think you need both. And on the dual technology side, that is anything related to national security, would it be AI, critical minerals, batteries, and we should talk about autos in that context. You're going to need to have a nice banking, insurance. You've got to have the services sectors. The business services have to be there. So they either have to be produced in Mexico or you need to import them. And right now we don't have enough of either.
That's a huge area of opportunity also for Mexican services, isn't it?
Yeah, and it could be a temporary, process to build up the capacity to train those for the future. But without it, you just can't attract the investment. One of the first things that we would look at when I was in the private sector of where to put a factory was, do we have the workforce? Can we get people we need? Because you don't want to build a factory. Sure, you need a road, you need electricity, you need all that, but you need people. You need people who can do the work. And you're competing with a lot of Asian economies that have a very highly educated population, many of them have many engineers. So.
It's shrinking population.
Yeah, it's shrinking, that's right, which is another opportunity.
Which is a tremendous, services should play a tremendous role. When people talk about nearshoring, all the focus is always, as ever is implying, on artificial intelligence, robotics, nanotechnology, molecular biology, programming, all those things we have to do. 100%. If we want to be serious about nearshoring, we have to enter the competition for technological leadership. No? But it's not only that. Because, you can have people in Oaxaca specialized in mezcal growing or gastronomy or design for textiles and apparel or design for other issues that takes advantage of the tremendous creativity. Most of the best mathematicians in Mexico are Mixtecos and Zapotecos. The Mixtecos and Zapotecos have tremendous mathematical abilities that if we develop when they're growing up, they will become the best. Some of the best programmers in the world come from the Juchitán area in Mexico. But it could be much more. And all those things are services. And then, of course, all the architectural services, financial services, and medical services. North America has a scarcity of nurses. North America needs 1 million nurses for the next 10 years. What if we had a program? The governor of Puebla was supposed to come, I think, no? What if we had a university program in Puebla to train nurses for North America, but in large numbers? So they have to be bilingual, no? And people will say, well, they'll go to the US at the beginning. By the way, nurses, they pay $85,000 a year in the US. So imagine 1 million Mexicans making $85,000. And then, of course, once you have that capacity, then you can develop medical tourism in Mexico. And the other thing I would say, why don't we organize this same conference next time in La Condesa y La Roma, here, downtown Mexico City?
In the Sisters Republic of La Condesa?
And there we'll need, in Condesa, we will need the translation the other way around, from Spanish from English to Spanish. Exactly. Or no, from Spanish to English, because even the waiters speak English there. There's a lot of Americans now living in Mexico and working professionally on the services sector side. So this is a two-way street, something we had never seen before. And I think, again, if we raise the level of ambition, why don't we we're talking about that the university program should be 2 years, no? To train a lot of apprentices, no? Why don't we have an agreement with the US or with Texas and California so that Mexican workers can train in their community colleges? No?
Be certified.
Let's do something that is ambitious, something like that. And if you convince people in Texas and California, they will end up accepting it, because the scarcity of labor is so deep in the U.S. that the choices are either you partner with Mexico or you partner with people that are far different from what we are.
Can we take 3 quick questions?
I have to go in 3 minutes, because I have to tape a TV program.
Please,
but
at least so you learn what the questions were about,
yeah,
how much people are against you. Okay, here, Christy, over here. Where's the microphone, by the way? Or get my microphone. Can you pass it over? Well, over here.
Christy Walton. I have a question around pharmaceuticals and the medical industry, because from the research that we've done on the supply chain of pharmaceuticals, still the majority of APIs come out of China. One of the issues with nearshoring, and that is the quality of the product and the transparency around the pharmaceutical industry. And I think when we talk about medical services in any of our countries, it is that piece that that really needs to be addressed. And I haven't really heard anything about that, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are on it.
That's a big, big gap also, yeah. Real quickly, over there, so you can learn the 3 questions. Please go ahead.
Yes, my question is, Luis stated an ambitious plan, but what about the political willingness? Right now we are in the process here in Mexico regarding the elections in the US, it's going to happen next year too. So let's put it on in a hypothetical way that it's happened. What will we needed to do about the political willingness to do it? Thank you.
Okay, and the third, please. It's over there. Oh, go ahead.
Okay. One, thank you all very much for the panel. Fascinating conversation. Particularly, I love the concept of, what kind of big proposal could come to an incoming United States president. I may disagree a bit that the answer is no, because I think the question is, as we're hearing, heading into the presidential election season in both countries, what would it take to get the next Mexican president to propose something like this, right? I mean, Luis, you're an experienced diplomat in this world. Was there ever in the last 25 years in your experience where you did propose something that was rejected out of hand, or maybe this is the moment now? Because to your point, when AMLO and Biden only meet once, in the fifth year, more than once, but barely once in the fifth year of a 6-year term, there's not time to address something big. But maybe this is the moment with the incoming administration. What would it take to have a Sheinbaum or Xochitl or president propose something like this to the United States?
Well, a good chat with President de la Calle.
Well, I think the Aspen Institute can be a conduit for something like this. But I mean, if we write reports under the assumption of question number 2, which is politically very hard, then we lower the level of ambition of the report. And nobody reads them. My advice is, why don't we raise the level of ambition and see how far we get? I mean, maybe we will not get everything. But I mean, I think the two forces that exist now, China and migration, are sufficiently large in the US that maybe there will be a click. Now, on the question on the safety and quality of medical devices and pharmaceuticals, Mexico can do many things on its own without an agreement with the US. If we are serious about nearshoring, really serious, I mean, we need a COFEPRIS of excellence. COFEPRIS is Mexico's FDA, so that we can develop the whole chain of medical services from the molecules to hospitals, the whole thing. If we are serious about developing a modern agriculture, and Mexico wants to become the kitchen of North America, we need a Senacica of excellence. Senacica is APHIS in the US. If we want to be a tourism powerhouse, as we are, then we need an excellent civil aviation authority, an FAA. No? And you go down the line. I mean, Mexico should be investing in these regulators and make them, the state of the art. Not because it's the right thing to do, and that's what we should be doing legally, because it's in our own interest. I mean, if we want to develop these new technologies and participate in these new value-added activities, then we need good regulators that will vouch for the quality of the things we do. And so Mexico, I think we need to put a lot of pressure on Claudia Sheinbaum, on Xochitl, on Samuel Garcia, and potentially other candidates, on the importance this thing has. And the advantage of all these institutions is that they charge for their services. The same thing that the NatBank things at the border, they will charge for using the bridges. So this is financially self-sustainable. Well, all these institutions, Senacica, COFEPRIS, Aviación Civil, CENEAM, all those charge for their services. So it's making this a budgetary excuse for not doing it is absolutely false. There's not a lack of money because they charge. With that, I have to go.
You have to go, yes. Okay, let's give a round of applause to our next president. He's a TV star. I will explain why is it that we have to make so good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, no, but, well, is that Luis had to go because he's
Well,
a TV
that's
star.
great, because now I can tell you why Luis was wrong, and he can't. No, he'll get me on his show later, so I need to be careful. He has an actual show. But I just wanted to respond to the two questions, the third one and the second one. They're a little bit of the same. How do you get somebody to not say no? And then what is the real political environment? I can't speak to the political environment in Mexico at the right time. But I do think we're going to go, in the United States, we'll go through a very intense rhetorical debate heading into this election, and then it will be time to govern. There will be a transition team put in place, and when there's a document presented to the transition team, which I would recommend the Aspen Institute do this, and it has a bold idea, you don't need to get everybody to agree to it. You just have to get a passionate advocate. Maybe somebody from EPA or DOE says, I thought that was a great idea. It was a great idea. And maybe it doesn't come exactly the NAD Bank, but something like that. It was very, very interesting. So shooting high is the right way. And just to repeat, good idea, right window, and execution can get it done. And I think there's a lot of good ideas coming out of this conference, which is great. Now, talking about a really important topic, which how do you guarantee the security of a supply chain like in pharmaceuticals? That's a really brilliant question. And I think it goes a little bit back to what I was saying on labor and environment. How do you even ensure that your supply chains on labor and environment are, quote, clean? It's very hard because the world, get inputs from all over the world. One thing that's really happened over time is an erosion of trust. People have lost trust in institutions, they've lost trust in business, they've lost trust in government. So we have to put in place new tools to regain that trust. I think supply chains is one area we might be able to do it through artificial intelligence and the technology, and developing programs that can actually do real tracing so you know where your inputs are coming from, where they're manufactured, how they're manufactured, getting kind of a certification. I think that's the way the world's going to go. Because if I had a choice and I had to pay a little more for something and I knew it was if I knew it was the right thing, I would pay it. And I think there's a lot of people in the world like that. So if you take the medical tourism question, if we were able to devise something like that, which we would need to work together in Mexico, and people had trust that the services were as good, if not better, and that the medicine was as good, if not better, that would be a huge selling point. So I thought it was a great question and really goes to the heart of what maybe nearshoring will look like in a few years. So something to think.
And perhaps following on Christy's question, there are some other products like organic products, for instance, or environmentally sustainable products that could be the sort of the staple from an area or region of the world. And that's something we're not exploring. In terms of the NAD Bank, as you know, in Mexico, we call it the Nada Bank.
Nada Bank.
Right? So we should perhaps think of
the new name.
institution.
We could call it the U.S., Canada, okay.
At least change, yes, the Mex, whatever, Mexusa, bank or something like that. Because the other one is not going to work.
We can change the name.
We can change the name, yeah. Well, I think it's time to take a break. Thank you very much. It's been tremendous.
Thank you, Enrique. Thank you, Luis.
Thank you, Albert.
My pleasure.
And just a final word. La idea de este ejercicio, como saben, es que podamos producir un white paper para entregárselo a los candidatos a la presidencia. Todo de lo que resulte de hoy y otros ejercicios que haremos sobre esta materia, se los estaremos entregando probablemente en febrero del año próximo a los candidatas a la presidencia. Creo que no tiene mucho caso con los candidatos, más bien con las candidatas. Bueno, muchísimas gracias.
Do we have time for a last question?
Yes, please.
Yes.
Please.
Thank you. So, Everett, I have a question. With geopolitical tensions on the rise with China and all the opportunities to come in Mexico, how does the National Economic Council see crafting policies to attract and support businesses shifting operations from China to Mexico?
It's a good question, and it goes almost back to the very beginning of my remarks, is that we're at a very early process, and I've worked in the National Economic Council, so look at what's on their plate. There's a war in the Middle East, Ukraine, energy shortages. I mean, it's, as someone pointed out, there's a lot of things on the, it's very, very messy. So, but there are people who are tasked with finding these new opportunities. And so the National Economic Council will, as we go through this very volatile period, we will reach a point of semi-stability, at which point the new ideas will begin to, people will start looking for, okay, we need a new framework. We can't just be reactive. We can't be tactical. We need to be strategic. We need a new framework. Who's got any, does anybody have any ideas? Well, Luis had an idea. That's when the action really starts to happen, is when you get those moments of opportunity that just open up and you don't know when they're coming. And if you have the idea on the table, it can be picked up and carried forward. The thing to remember, at least in our government in the United States, is that many of those people are overworked and they really like somebody to come in and tell them something they haven't heard and give them something that they can take to their boss and say, hey, this is a good idea. What do you think about this? So don't let it atrophy. Keep going at it. Keep putting the ideas out there, and the time will come when it will be time for action, and then you go and do it. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Muchísimas